go potty.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Darkling Chronicles. Tonight we're going to look at a haunting that is so bizarre and so creepy, it will blow your mind. Now this isn't your classic Victorian ghost story, no, there's no fainting maidens or creaky candelabras in this tale. This actually happened in 2011, a perfectly modern year where most people were minding their damn business, eating pot noodles and hoping their credit score would behave. At least that's what I was doing. What were you doing? Just for the side note, I don't like pot noodles anymore. Gone off them. Hate them. Meanwhile, in Gary, Indiana, a family, this is in the USA, a family moved into a house that seemed determined to ruin their lives. And I'm talking, there were black flies in the winter, children levitating, footsteps where no one was walking. And there was even an infamous moment where a child walked up a wall like he'd been personally coached by The Exorcist or The Grudge, any of those freaky things. This case didn't just terrify a family, it terrified medical staff, it rattled social workers, it sent police officers straight out of the house saying nope, and that's what I would have done as well. And it left a Catholic priest so concerned that he performed 3, yes, you heard me right, 3 exorcisms. So settle in, put your brain in a bowl, because tonight I am going to tell you about the Ammons demon house. If you want to geek out, you can look in the description of this video and I will put the source link clicks so you can go and have a look for yourself, because I actually hadn't heard of this story, which makes me so incredibly ashamed of myself, because Zach Bacon's covered this. It's been on most ghost programs now that I know about it, and I cannot believe that I'm just now learning of it. I think I dropped the ball, guys. I dropped the ball and I'm sorry. If you can hear snoring, it's the dog. He is next to me. I've got the sound cancelling microphone on, but this little guy, he loves me. I love him. He don't leave my side. And he snores. Loud. Demonic loud. Yeah, anyway, so without further ado, I will start telling you about the Ammons house, because it is absolutely horrendous. And we're going to break it down into a few different parts. So first of all, I'm going to start by just giving you an overall history of this place. And we're going to also hear some accounts from people who lived it, experienced it. And there were so many people who witnessed things in this house. It's unreal. Now, there are hauntings that whisper, hauntings that inconvenience, and then there's hauntings that are just damn right terrifying. And then there's the Ammons case. That's how bad it is. The exaggeration there was a telltale sign of how bad it is. Now, the haunting we're going to explore, it isn't a gentle rattle or a polite ghost floating down a banister. No, my friends. This case enters the room like a bat out of hell. To be quite honest with you, reading about it and learning about it has been an eye-opening experience. It's pretty horrific. It's dramatic, it's chaotic, it's relentlessly inconvenient, and thoroughly documented by people who do not traditionally enjoy reporting supernatural activity in their official paperwork. What makes the Ammons Demon House stand out historically is not just the content of the claims, as wild and cinematic as they are, but the sheer volume of professionals who walked into this house expecting a routine appointment and instead found themselves in what probably just is a low-budget horror film, essentially, that no one asked to be cast in. Police officers, social workers, psychologists, nurses, a family physician, a Catholic priest, and multiple neighbours. It sounds like one of those bad jokes, doesn't it? All those people walk into a bar. Unfortunately, this one isn't a joke, and it's horrific. And eventually, a documentary filmmaker who decided the best thing to do with the house was, well, to remove it from the planet entirely, which is never a reassuring sign. This place must have been awful. But to understand why this haunting caught national attention, we need a bit of context, don't we? Gary, Indiana in 2011 wasn't exactly thriving. The area struggled with economic decline, abandoned properties, high crime rates, and more than a little urban decay. It wasn't unusual for houses to have, let's just call it character, drafts and mould and strange noises, and the occasional mouse believing that it owned the kitchen. It sounds like it probably did own the kitchen. At this point, just give it an apron. Just let it carry on. But even in this setting, the Ammons house managed to impress. That says something, doesn't it? Behaving less like an old property and more like something possessed by the spirit of the Conjuring franchise, but with none of the production value and absolutely zero charm. Now, the family at the centre of this case are Latoya Ammons, her mother Rosa, and Latoya's 3 children, and they moved into the house in November 2011. They were an ordinary family in every sense, no history of dramatics, no long-standing supernatural fascination. They did not, as far as anyone can tell, wake up each morning hoping to star in a demonic soap opera. No one does. Plain and simple. They just simply needed a place to live, which is fair dues, isn't it? Especially from that area, it sounds like quite, I don't want to say poor, but it essentially is, isn't it? I suppose it's quite a deprived area. Having a roof over your head is gold, isn't it? No matter where you are or where you live in the world, having a roof over your head is what we can all hope for. But it sounds like this came at a very horrible price, to be honest. So, unfortunately for them, the house had other plans. The haunting didn't start subtly, and there was no slow build, no gentle introduction. The house launched full throttle into what could only be described as a season premiere of horror. The kind of instant unsettling atmosphere that lets you know something is off before anyone says a word. Visitors described the property as having a heavy feeling. One neighbour interviewed years later said, "I didn't like walking past it. It felt wrong, like something watching you from the inside." I don't know about you guys, but I used to live in a place called Yatton, which is like this little village. And, well, I suppose it's a bit bigger than a village. I don't know, it's expanded now. Anyway, there was a house there. And I remember it so clearly. And it was one of those houses that if you had to walk past it on your own at night, even on the opposite side of the road, it gave you the creeps. Maybe I need to Google Maps it and see if it's still there, because it was terrifying. You know, the kind of gardens that are just overgrown. It feels like someone's watching you from the inside. There are no one's lived in it for years. The curtains are shabby and horrific. I mean, someone might have lived in there. I was just a kid, so I'm none the wiser, but if you're living in there, you're living in squalor. I know we're not all wealthy, but there is kind of a standard in there. Anyway, so another person said the house didn't want people in it. Now, to be clear, most houses don't have opinions, but this one apparently did, and none of these opinions were positive. Historically, hauntings this intense usually appear in folklore, pre-scientific eras, or heavily religious settings. Such cases are often dismissed as mass hysteria, superstition, or embellished legend. What sets the Ammons case apart is how modern it is. This haunting didn't unfold in 1911 with candles and superstition. It happened in 2011 in a city full of mobile phones, healthcare professionals, government agencies, and individuals who are, generally speaking, too tired and too underpaid to invent demons for entertainment. From a documentary perspective, what makes this story particularly valuable is the volume of documentation there is. So they have police logs, child service reports, medical statements, the priest's correspondence, interviews, newspaper investigations, and a documentary film which filmed the aftermath. In other words, this story didn't rely solely on hearsay. It's built from a variety of sources. Some are sceptical, some are terrified, and some simply trying to get through the day without acknowledging the phrase, walked up a wall. in their official report. It is extremely rare in paranormal history to have so many professionals independently record events. Most hauntings fall apart under scrutiny. This one only becomes more peculiar the deeper you go. We're going to walk through it chronologically, historically and analytically, and we're going to hear some voices from people who were there, people who had no interest in the paranormal fame and in some cases actively wanted nothing to do with the situation. When a haunting begins, you expect creaky floorboards, maybe the odd whisper, the wind pretending to be something supernatural, and at worst, a door closing by itself. The Ammons house, however, skipped the small talk. It didn't give the family time to settle, unpack, or even properly breathe before presenting its first act: flies. Not summertime flies buzzing lazily around food, not the occasional rogue intruder who slips through the open window to ruin your day and annoy the hell out of you. These were dense, crawling clusters that covered the porch windows like something out of a low-budget apocalypse film. Just let your imagination take you there for a second about what that must look like, sound like, and feel like to be present in a room with a dense mass of crawling clusters of flies. You know when you see a spider, and then if you like spiders, you won't understand this, but you know when you see a spider and you get that like feeling for hours after that, like you're on edge. You don't know if you feel dirty or if you just feel really unsafe on a high level. That is how I would feel in that room with those flies, I'm pretty sure. Now, Latoya described them as everywhere. She says you'd wipe them off and the next day they'd be back, like hundreds of them. Not dozens, hundreds. The Indianapolis Star reporter, who later interviewed the family, noted that this detail was suspicious, purely because it was ecologically absurd. Black flies do not sprint to the Midwest in winter unless they are suicidal or on a mission, and these ones seem determined, almost organised, as if convening for a conference. A creepy demon conference, I think. Rosa confirmed, we killed them, but they kept coming back. It didn't matter what we did. The flies, deeply committed to their role, apparently, were only the beginning. Yes, the horrors are still going to unfold. Now, inside the house, the atmosphere was immediately oppressive. Rosa reported that the air felt thick and charged, as though stepping inside meant walking through the breath of something that did not appreciate company. Many witnesses described an unnatural quiet inside a home. I've heard this recently described, this unnatural quiet, and I totally know what it feels like. But they said it feels like someone pressing their hands against your ears. You know that feeling, if you do it, give it a go. Everything's got that little buzz, like the silence, pure silence comes in, but also it feels like someone's around your head. If you know, you know. Now, the children were the first to sense something was wrong. They complained of hearing footsteps in empty rooms. Now, not polite footsteps either, like toes tipping. It was like heavy, deliberate footsteps, the kind a grown man might produce whilst pacing. These poor kids, they must have been terrified. One of the police reports later confirmed these sounds. Officers on scene reported hearing footsteps from the basement and upper floors with no persons present. Rosa also recalled hearing the sounds of doors opening and closing when no one was near them. And then there were the wet footprints. These appeared randomly, usually on the living room floor, perfectly formed, adult-sized, as though someone with soaked boots had walked through moments earlier. Only no one had. The prints led nowhere. They arrived uninvited and evaporated in their own time. In a later interview, one neighbour said, "I saw those footprints once. Thought someone had broke in, but the doors were locked. They just appeared. Nothing about that house felt consistent. Heat would vanish. Cold spots travelled like someone dragged a freezer behind them. Lights flickered with a petulance usually reserved for ghost hunting shows, trying to justify their runtime. And then the shadows begin." The children, especially the youngest, described seeing a tall, dark figure moving silently along the corridor. Ugh, the worst part about this is they said he had no face and no details, just a humanoid shape that appeared and vanished depending on who was looking. Horrendous. These kids. Why is it always the kids? These ghosts or whatever need to leave the kids alone. Leave the kids alone. I suppose they're innocent, they're naive, they can't really protect themselves in certain ways, so they're classic, aren't they, for demons and stuff. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. The children said he moves without sound. He stays in the hallway. He watches at night. He doesn't want us here. Oh, that is a squeaky bum moment. I mean, I know their mum has not got a choice. She needs somewhere to live. But at the same time, those points are much scarier to me than sleeping in a bus shelter on the side of a road, in a cardboard box while it's pissing it down with rain. I would rather do all of those things than know that he's watching at night and he doesn't want me there. For the love of God. One child added quite casually, he walks like he's angry. Good God. Which frankly is not how you want a shadow entity to walk, is it? You don't really want them there at all, but if they're going to walk anyway, you'd want them to be quite calm and casually just strolling, not throwing a fit and stomping around with wet feet. Now, nighttime brought its own horrors. Blankets were pulled from sleeping bodies. Lovely. Children woke up screaming, claiming someone was standing over them. Rosa described nights where she would hear running, actual running down the hall, despite everyone being in bed. There was also the unsettling phenomena of breathing. Multiple family members reported hearing someone exhale directly into their ears while laying down. That's one of my worst nightmares. That is actually one of my worst nightmares. I wouldn't be able, I don't know what I'd do. I don't know what I'd do if someone spoke or breathed in my ear when I was trying to sleep. I think I would rocket to the moon. I'd leave my body. I would RIP, essentially. Now, Latoya said you'd feel breath on your face and it was warm, but no one was there. So that's funny, isn't it, that the breath was warm? Because they say obviously spirit are cold. So that's a bit that's a bit weird to me that it was warm, because spirits can't produce warm breath, can they? Do you any different? You need to let me know in the comments if you know any different, but that's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Unless obviously there's creatures from hell, then maybe they're hot, who knows. Now, historical paranormal cases often involve shadow people, watchers or sleep intruders, but typically these appear sporadically, and the Ammons shadow man appeared frequently. He was a reliable source, apparently. He would just always be there. At least he was consistent. Even family and friends noticed the strangeness, and one visitor said the house felt wrong, adding, "You know when you walk in somewhere and you feel unwelcome? It was like that." Another said you could feel eyes on you. And still, despite the deeply inconvenient supernatural squatters, the family remained in the home because life unfortunately does not pause for demons. Rent must be paid and work must be done. Children must be fed, and the terror, as it turns out, is easier to tolerate when you can't afford to be anywhere else. The reality of that is very sad, actually, and very true, because you can be desperate in any desperate situation. And I know I jested a minute ago, but to actually have no financial means to move out is actually a really sad position to be in when you know your family are this terrified from something that they cannot explain. That's very sad. But anyway, the house was just warming up because soon something happened that pushed this haunting from bizarre to utterly unprecedented. It begins with a levitating child. So the Ammons house was already made its intentions clear. The strange footsteps of shadow figures and uninvited flies, and the general personality of a house that would absolutely slam a door on you if it had hands. But everything so far could still, technically, be explained away. Stress, paranoia, faulty wiring, condensation, and of course the overactive imagination of a child. A neighbourhood prankster with a wet shoe fetish, maybe? Then came the moment that snapped the story firmly into the realm of impossible. The levitation. So one night, Rosa entered her granddaughter's bedroom and found the child levitating, not rising gently like a chosen one discovering her supernatural powers. No, she was not twitching or bouncing like children sometimes do in dreams. She was suspended above the mattress, rigid as a plank, eyes closed, limbs locked, body absolutely motionless. Rosa later recalled she wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing heavy. She was stiff, like someone had frozen her. Latoya added she looked dead, floating, like someone had held her up, but no one was there. The levitation lasted long enough for the family to process it, panic, begin praying and continue panicking, and watch the girl drop suddenly back onto the bed as though whatever mechanism had been holding her up in the air had simply switched off. Now she remembered nothing. The family's explanation was simple. Something picked her up. And quite frankly, there was no real explanation for this. After the levitation, everything escalated and the children's behaviour shifted dramatically and consistently. Historically, demonic possession cases in Christian records often begin with environmental disturbances. Whether this is spiritual, psychological or cultural patterning, it's widely debated. But the Ammons case followed that textbook trajectory exactly, which is uncomfortable to say the least. The children began speaking in voices that were much deeper than their normal voices. The voices were gravelly, they were monotone, they were emotionless and unnervingly calm. Ugh. One of the boys reportedly told a family member, "You're going to die." Another said, "Leave us alone, he doesn't want you here." When asked who he was, the child pointed to the corner of the room and said, "The Shadow Man." A child psychologist later wrote in a case note, "The boys' expressions and tone changed abruptly. Their demeanour was unnatural and shifted in ways I cannot explain." One of the boys would stare at his brother for long periods without blinking. Another would suddenly scream, thrash, and fall silent. A neighbour later said the kids were different after a while. Their eyes changed. They looked tired and older. A particularly unnerving detail comes from a family physician present during the medical evaluation. He described one boy as having a strange, unnerving grin that did not match the situation or emotional state. Ugh. God, that's like every horror film we've ever seen. He stared at the doctors, smiling, and then without warning headbutted his grandmother with enough force to send her flying backwards. This poor woman. Doctors commented that the strength displayed was not appropriate for his age. He then turned to another adult in the room and growled. If a kid's going to turn and growl at me, I think everyone should have the option then to defend themselves. I know it's not this kid's fault, okay? But my natural reaction would be to like trying to hit it or something. I don't even know what I'd do. Like an actual demonic growl would send a reaction out of you, wouldn't it? You'd either run out of the room. To be fair, I'd probably leave the room, but also it's like those videos when people make people jump like hiding in bins and then come out and then they end up smacking them around the face and they didn't mean to, but they got scared. You know, it wouldn't be my fault. Now, this was apparently a low, deep growl. And someone said it was not the sound a child of that age should be physically capable of. So that just shows you how bad this growl was. Nighttime became a battlefield, and Rosa and Latoya reported hearing running footsteps when the children were in bed, seeing a shadow standing by the children's pillows, blankets being yanked violently off their bodies, and the children waking up screaming in a way that suggested pain rather than fear. One of the boys later told investigators, "It hurts when he touches me." When asked who he was, the child answered, "The tall man with no face." I cannot tell you the horror on my face right now. You know, it's just not okay. Now, this description appears in several classic hauntings: a faceless male figure. Historically, the faceless apparition is associated with sleep paralysis, night terrors, or demonic folklore, and occasionally environmental toxins affecting the brain. But whatever the case, faceless entities are rarely a sign of a wholesome domestic environment. Amen to that. One night, Latoya said she saw a large black figure pacing the living room, not floating, it was pacing, and pacing with purpose, as though irritated by the family's continued existence in his territory. She described it as black, solid, command-shaped shadow. It moved like it was walking, but there was no sound. She claimed it left footprints when it moved, more of those wet, heavy prints that appeared throughout the house. Historically speaking, apparitions that cast no face and produce no noise but leave physical impressions fall into a category known as transitory manifestations, the type associated with intelligent hauntings or malevolent entities. In simpler terms, whatever this wasn't a ghost doing a cameo appearance, okay? It was interacting with the environment, and several times the children reported being pushed or thrown. In one case, a child was lifted and tossed into a wall with enough force to leave a mark. Rosa said something picked him up and there was no one near him. The children began hearing voices, at first inside their heads and then externally. Ugh. Do you know what? I'm actually a massive believer that we have a voice inside our head for a reason. And I know this sounds trippy and a bit out there and maybe a bit woo-woo, but I believe that our heads are like antennas, right? Because we're picking up all of this. We are essentially energy, aren't we? We're picking up all of these frequencies all of the time. I honestly believe that some entities somewhere, whether it's these demonic entities in different realms or different dimensions, or maybe different beings on different planets, for whatever reason, whatever created us or whatever is looking out for us or interacting with us needs to know our collective thoughts. I believe that there's something in that. And yes, I'm a nutter, but I honestly believe that nutters are changing the world. So there's just something in it. Because you hear, don't you, people who have like UFO experiences, they get communicated with telepathically. Tell me that our thoughts don't have a reason. I think that it's the only way that they can keep tabs on what we're all... I don't know who they are, by the way. I'm just guessing all of these like beings and different creatures. It just feels like... I watch a lot of near-death experience stuff as well, like people who had experiences all over the world who don't know each other, who've never spoken to each other. And they say that when they pass over and they go, that's that loving, really strong, loving feeling like they just didn't want to come back to this planet. The, I guess, like ethereal being that met them was speaking to them inside their head. So, you know, let's just go with my theory that there is something in that. So this doesn't surprise me that it first of all was talking inside his head and then externally. I suppose as well, on a frequency level, maybe it's easier to talk inside our heads than it is to manifest energy outside of us. Just a little bit of thought there. Food for thought. Anyway, the kids claimed that he talks to us, he tells us what to do, he wants to hurt Mum, and he says he lives here. So while many psychological conditions can produce auditory hallucinations, the timing and the consistency and the escalation combined with the physical phenomena made this case difficult to place neatly into a clinical category. 2 visitors, after spending an hour in the home, refused to come back. I would do that too. One said it felt like the house was breathing. Another described hearing scratching from inside the walls, despite no animals being present. A third visitor left the house abruptly after seeing a black shape run across the floor. This was not a social house. As the activity intensified, one thing became clear. This haunting wasn't random, it wasn't confused, and it wasn't accidental. Whatever was in this house seemed interested in the children specifically. And that interest was about to reach a violent point. One witnessed by medical professionals, social workers, and state officials. Because next, a child will walk up a wall. If the events inside the Ammons home had stayed within its walls, the story would have remained a disturbing footnote in local folklore, a tale shared in hushed voices at barbecues and family gatherings. But the haunting did not politely confine itself to the property. It followed the children into government buildings, hospitals, and clinical examination rooms, places where the supernatural is not merely unexpected, but profoundly unwelcome. The turning point came when the Department of Child Services became involved. DCS worker Valerie Washington was assigned to the case after concerns were raised about the children's well-being, and up to this point she had dealt with hundreds of families across varying crises. She would later describe the Ammons incident as unlike anything I have ever encountered. Washington's initial task was routine. It was to evaluate the children at the local clinic. And what unfolded next would earn a permanent place in one of the most baffling collections of case notes in American child welfare history. Inside the small exam room, the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Washington wrote in her report that the older boy began muttering under his breath, staring at his brother with an expression she described as unnerving and unnatural for a child. Then the younger boy began to growl, quietly at first, and then louder. He fixed his eyes on Washington, his face changing as though, in her words, his personality had completely shifted. But the moment that would make this case national news happened next. The younger boy stood up and placed his hands on his grandmother's hands, and without breaking eye contact, leaned backwards. Further still, and then so far that the angle of his body physically should not have been possible. Washington described what happened as a chilling precision. He walked up the wall. He never let go of his grandma's hands, but he walked up the wall and then flipped over, landing on his feet. Nurses witnessed it, a family physician witnessed it, a DSC employee witnessed it, and none of them were believers in the paranormal. None of them were prepared. One nurse ran out of the room. Washington later wrote, "I was frightened. I thought it was fake, but after what I saw, I am certain it was not." And Dr. Jeffrey Aniku stated in his notes that he had no logical explanation for what happened. Washington attempted to interview the older boy afterwards, who reportedly said, "It's time to die. I will kill you." When she asked who told him that, the boy responded, "The thing inside me. For the love of God." Washington terminated the interview immediately. While the younger boy had displayed the most physical anomalies, the older boy exhibited a different kind of disturbance that medical professionals found equally concerning. During the same clinic visit, he suddenly lifted his grandmother by the throat with surprising force and snarled, "She's not my nana anymore." Then he blinked, returned to normal, and had no memory of the event. Medical staff observed that both the children displayed behaviours beyond normal psychiatric conditions. Strength, tone and facial expressions changed rapidly, and this was not dissociation, not trauma, not a trauma response, and not a typical childhood behavioural disorder. The behaviour did not track with any known clinical presentation. Following the incident, Washington attempted to interpret what she had witnessed. As a government employee, she was required to rule out environmental and social factors before reaching any supernatural conclusions. She inspected the house herself. What she reported next only added fuel to the fire. Down in the basement, she noticed a patch of dirt beneath the stairs. It looked disturbed, as if someone had been digging, and when she asked the family about it, they said the house had always been like that. She also reported the basement had a presence, and it felt unsafe. She later admitted privately to police that she refused to return to the house after that day. A child psychologist evaluated the boys and wrote something that still shocks researchers today. They said the youngest child's behaviour and effect changed completely when discussing the haunting. He appeared to be responding to internal stimuli that did not correspond with psychosis. She later added, "I am unable to determine if this is a mental illness or something unexplainable." The doctors, however, were divided. Some suggested behavioural problems until the violent episodes occurred, and others suggested trauma until they witnessed events with their own eyes. One doctor reportedly said, "If this is psychological, it's the most extreme case I've ever seen." But the most striking pattern was this. When far away from the house, the children behaved almost entirely normal. When they returned, their behaviours resumed within hours. This detail echoed dozens of historical possession cases where the afflicted only manifested symptoms within a specific environment. Months later, during a follow-up interview with a journalist, Washington was asked if she believed the children were possessed. She paused and said, "I believe something unnatural was happening. I don't know if possession is the right word, but I know what I saw." The clinic incident forced DCS to escalate the case to the police department, and when officers arrived, they were armed with skepticism and flashlights. They did not leave with skepticism because the house had one final surprise waiting for them in the basement. Which brings us to one of the strangest sections of the entire haunting. When the police were called to the Ammons case, they expected a familiar story, like an overwhelmed family, behavioural issues, maybe a health hazard or two. They did not expect to write reports that would later be studied by demonologists, psychologists, theologians. If I said theologians, I can't say that right, I think that's right, and skeptics around the world. But that's precisely what happened. Gary Police Department veteran Sergeant Charles Austin, with over 40 years on the force, responded to the call. Austin was a seasoned, sharp and confident, and importantly, admittedly, non-believer in the supernatural. He once described his mindset as, "If I can't cuff it, it doesn't exist." Classic attitude there, isn't it? Of a American police officer. It sounds quite brutal. But by the end of the investigation, he would tell the Indianapolis Star, "I am now a believer." So what changed him? It began in the basement. Ooh, cute, eerie music. Police officers followed DCS worker Valerie Washington into the house. She refused to go downstairs, so the officers led the way. The basement was unfinished, exposed brick, cracked concrete floor, wooden steps, dim lighting, and a faint smell of damp earth. Classic horror film basement architecture. Never a good sign. But beneath the stairs was something stranger, an area of dirt that looked recently disturbed. Not chaotic digging and not a random soil movement, but purposefully intentional, organised. Officers described the patch as loose, scooped and intentionally manipulated. One officer remarked it looked like someone was burying something, but nothing was buried, not visibly at least. One of the strangest details rarely discussed outside of the main article is the liquid. Police found a thick, black, oily substance seeping from the concrete floor. It wasn't tar, it wasn't mould, it wasn't sewage stuff, it was something else. They wiped it up, came back an hour later, and it had returned. They wiped it again, returned the next day, and it had spread. Austin later said, "It wasn't like any substance I've seen in a home. It had a smell and it was slightly metallic." Now, metallic smells in paranormal cases are historically associated with two things. One is apparitions and manifestations, and two are blood vessels rupturing during extreme psychic stress. I think we can agree that neither possibility is ideal for home ownership. During this basement inspection, one officer attempted to photograph the area. His digital camera malfunctioned immediately upon entering the basement, and outside the house, the camera worked perfectly. Inside, it was dead, frozen, and utterly unresponsive. This level of electromagnetic interference appears in very few documented cases, typically in poltergeist phenomena or alleged demonic infestations where equipment disruption is common. While investigating the main floor, officers spotted the fresh, wet footprints appearing across the living room. But it wasn't raining, the doors were locked, and no children were in the area, and the prints emerged in a straight line and then stopped abruptly, as though the entity responsible had vanished mid-step. Austin's exact words were, "I followed them, and they just ended." Inside the house, several officers heard growling, deep throaty echoing, not a dog, not a person, something else. One officer pointed his torch into the kitchen, hearing movement. He reported seeing a dark mass move across the room. His partner, who did not see the shadow, heard a cupboard slam shut at the exact same moment. Oh, God, this entity was taking no prisoners, right? Just didn't give a shit who saw it, did it? It was like, nah, I'm here. Gonna possess the kids. Put some wet footprints on the floor. Do something in the basement with some like weird gloopy substance. Yeah, casual. The most chilling police encounter came from Officer Hammond, who remained outside while the others searched the interior. Now, while he was sitting in his patrol car, his radio made a crackling noise. Not a static noise, it was something more deliberate, and a deep male voice, distorted and unfamiliar, broke through. It said something untangible, not English, not recognisable. Hammond responded with a professional, "Unit calling, please repeat," and no one answered. He checked his logs. No officer had transmitted. His equipment showed no outgoing communication, and Austin said, "We reviewed every log. No one had keyed their radio. Whoever spoke wasn't one of my men." One officer managed to capture a single photo inside the house that didn't corrupt. Upon review, they noticed a cloudy white figure near the window, a faint outline resembling a face, a distortion around the closet door frame, and Austin showed the picture to a detective who remarked, "That looks like something standing there." Police techs later dismissed it as a reflection or lens flare. Austin disagreed. During the basement inspection, police noticed religious objects arranged neatly on a table: rosaries, Bibles, candles, and small statues. Latoya explained, "It's the only place in the house where we feel safe," but officers noted that the area felt colder than the rest of the basement and oddly quiet. This prompted one detective to ask, "If this is the safe area, why does it feel worse than the rest of the house?" Fair comment. After leaving the property, multiple officers refused to return, and one said, "I'll serve warrants, chase suspects, anything, but I won't go back to that house." Austin himself admitted, "Every time I think about that place, I feel uneasy. I won't step foot in there again." This is notable because officers are not typically shy about re-entering crime scenes. They do not scare easily, and they do not hallucinate collectively, and they absolutely do not like filing supernatural paperwork. But something in the Ammons house rattled them deeply. And as strange as the police encounters were, the most dramatic part of the investigation had yet to unfold. I know, there's more. Because next, a Catholic priest would confirm the officers' fears and perform one of the most controversial exorcisms in the modern American history. When a haunting escalates from irritating to physically dangerous, the Catholic Church is often the last stop. Traditionally, they try to avoid handing out exorcisms like they are promotional flyers. It's a bit of a process, and it requires more paperwork than a small business loan, apparently. So the fact that this case resulted in multiple authorised exorcisms should tell you everything about how seriously it was taken. Father Michael Maganot was a parish priest at St. Stephen Martyr Church. He was known for being steady, methodical, and not the type to declare something demonic unless absolutely necessary. He wasn't a ghost hunter, he wasn't a sensationalist, and he didn't carry holy water recreationally. In short, he was exactly the kind of priest you would want investigating something unusual. Father Michael visited the Ammons home after being contacted by the hospital chaplain, who had heard about the children's behaviour during their medical evaluations, and the chaplain described the situation as beyond clinical, which is admittedly not the phrase you want to hear from a healthcare worker. And Father Michael arrived expecting to find a distressed family and a stressful environment. What he found was considerably worse. He interviewed the family in their living room, and during the conversation he noted that the room's temperature fluctuated dramatically. Not a gentle draft, but an extreme shift that felt unnatural and focused, as though the coldness targeted specific individuals. He observed that the children reacted violently whenever he mentioned God, prayer, or deliverance. Their expressions changed, their tone shifted, and their posture stiffened. Father Michael later said there was something inside them resisting any mention of the divine. This language is typical of Catholic possession cases. Evasion to the sacred is considered a major sign. And while he walked through the house, Father Michael reported hearing faint whispers coming from empty rooms. He described them as low muttering, as though several people were speaking quietly together. He also claimed that certain areas, especially near the basement stairs, felt charged, like static electricity in the air before a storm. He touched the basement door and felt a vibration, not an earthquake, not a passing train, a subtle, continuous hum. He later said, "I had a sense that I was not alone, and whatever was present was aware of my presence." This is classic intelligent haunting behaviour and entirely responding to environmental changes, especially spiritual challenge. Now, Father Michael's assessment was that the Catholic Church teaches that possession manifests through 4 primary signs. The first is a sign of hidden knowledge. The second is the use of language unknown to the person. The third is superhuman strength. And the fourth is evasion to sacred objects or environments. Father Michael observed all 4 in the Ammons children. He wrote in his report, the children exhibited knowledge beyond their age, attempted to speak in guttural tones, displayed significant physical force, and reacted negatively to prayer. Theologically speaking, this placed them squarely in a major exorcism territory. Before requesting authorization for the official exorcism, Father Michael performed a simple house blessing, which typically involves sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers, and inviting the Holy Spirit into the space. The reaction was immediate, and during the prayer, one of the boys began convulsing, his eyes rolling back in his head. He fell to the floor, shook violently, and then went still. Another child clutched his stomach and screamed that something was inside him trying to claw out, and Father Michael was forced to pause the prayer and comfort the children. He later said the blessing aggravated whatever was there. For priests, this is considered diagnostic. You don't expect a blessing trigger seizure unless something else is operating in the environment. It's very true, isn't it? It was a classic sign that something was inside these poor kids and it had gone way too far. Now, exorcisms require permission from the diocesan bishop. This is not a casual process, and you cannot email the bishop saying, "Hi, demons again, can you please advise?" You need evidence, you need witness reports, you need medical evaluations and psychological clearance. I find it fascinating that you need that much evidence. Surely if they're displaying those 4 signs of possession, like knowing another language, having more knowledge in their age, having more strength in their age, etc., that is enough. It's not normal human behaviour, is it? So I don't understand why you've got to jump through so many hoops just to get... What's a girl to do to get a bloody exorcism around here? Like, just, by this point, the demon will be taking over you fully and going to your job and trying to kill everyone. I just don't understand why it needs to be so, admin based. It's so admin heavy, isn't it? Anyway, Father Michael gathered police reports, which were already disturbing enough, the DCS case files, doctor statements, his own observations, and the accounts from the hospital staff, and he submitted everything to the bishop, who reviewed the material and responded simply, "Proceed." Yeah, proceed. I'm glad you said proceed, because bloody hell, this poor family. This alone apparently was remarkable because the Catholic Church approves very few exorcisms annually, usually less than 30 worldwide. That to me makes me feel like they just want people to be possessed. Are they in on the demons? What's going on here? Why are they giving out so few? Though I did actually hear a exorcist guy say recently in a podcast that there's not actually that many of them. So maybe they're just all busy, I don't know. Now, Latoya sat with rosemary beads in her hands when the exorcism first took place at Father Michael's church. And Father Michael placed a crucifix on her forehead and began reading the rite of the exorcism in Latin. Within minutes, Latoya's face contorted, she growled, her voice lowered, her body stiffened, and her eyes rolled back. It was a clear and Father Michael says it was a clear manifestation of resistance. He pressed the crucifix harder and she began convulsing, gasping, and then shouting in a voice that was not her own. Father Michael commanded, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave." And she screamed and then collapsed, and the session lasted about 2 hours. And then the second exorcism happened, and this one occurred weeks later. And during the ritual, Latoya's breathing changed, deep, slow, almost mechanical. She spat curses and language that Father Michael did not recognise, and at one point she attempted to stand and strike him. Her strength increased suddenly and beyond what seemed possible, he later said, and historically this is recorded in hundreds of possession cases. Also, an adrenaline-like surge with no injury or fatigue afterwards. He completed the rite exhausted. And during the final session, Latoya became calm, not peaceful, calm in a way an animal becomes still before a predator retreats. Father Michael felt a shift in the room. The air relaxed and the atmosphere lightened, and he said, "The presence lifted and I felt it leave." This aligns with the theological tradition. The entity leaves through dramatic release or sudden dissipation. And from that day forward, the children's behaviour improved dramatically. There were no convulsions, no violent episodes, no strange voices, no more walking and no more levitation. But the house remained toxic. And this is where our next chapter begins, because a man with a television show would enter the scene and decide the best solution to a dangerous, possibly demonic house was to buy it. Yes, we're of course talking about Zach Bagans. So, by the time the church finished with the Ammons case, the story had already begun circulating among paranormal investigators. And in the world of televised ghost hunting, news travels faster than an EVP in a Victorian asylum. And enter Zach Bagans, a man whose career consists of walking into the dark, dangerous, horrible places while dramatically informing invisible entities that he is not afraid. And I used to like it when he's like, "At that exact moment, I felt it on my head." That was a really bad American accent. I'm very sorry if you're American. Bagans heard rumours of a modern American house with multiple documented possessions, police reports that read like horror fiction, and a basement that seemed to actively dislike human presence. And to him, this wasn't a warning, it was a real estate opportunity. People do actually make a lot of money when they buy haunted houses because they can charge up to £300-500 a night for paranormal investigators to go in there. That's if they're just staying there, with one or two of them. If there's a group, it's even more money, but most people would research a home before buying it, or look around the neighbourhood or check for plumbing issues to ensure it's not evil. But Zach Bagans skipped all of that and purchased the Ammons house without ever stepping foot inside, and he claims he felt drawn to it, which is arguably not what you want from a house with a demonic reputation. But Bagans has built a career out of making questionable life choices in dark rooms, so he proceeded. Now Bagans moved his production crew in the property to film what would eventually become his 2018 documentary, Demon House. To put this gently, things got messy immediately. The crew reported sudden waves of panic, severe headaches, nausea, dark shapes moving through hallways, growls captured on audio, and doors rattling violently, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. One camera operator left halfway through filming, claiming something in that house wants to hurt people. Ugh. Another crew member said he began having nightmares involving a tall shadow figure with no face. No way. A disturbingly familiar description given what the children had reported years earlier. And one of the most chilling behind the scene moments involved a production assistant who stayed in the house overnight. Why would you do that? Something no reasonable person should attempt. He reportedly became violently ill and then began acting erratically, and Bagans later stated that the assistant lost control, becoming aggressive and unpredictable. The best part about this is the assistant eventually left the production and refused to discuss the incident publicly. That says a lot, doesn't it? So during filming, Bagans himself reported physical effects. His eyesight began deteriorating, specifically one eye, which he attributed to the time in the house, and medical professionals later confirmed permanent damage to the muscles controlling his eyes. I mean, they probably went in there and provoked. You know what they're like. Like, they probably went in there and were just like, you can't hurt me. If you've watched Ghost Adventures, you know what they're like. If you haven't watched it, I recommend it. It's, I don't know, obviously it might be a bit over the top to some people, but it's really interesting to learn about these places that are haunted. And they do generally pick really good places, like iconic places. So things normally always happen. But in the documentary, Bagans said, after this investigation, my body was never the same. And this raises a question that many people had afterwards, which is, was the house genuinely harmful, or had Bagans created an environment of psychological contagion? But to be fair to him, at least 3 people experienced lasting effects. Is this a coincidence? If it is, it's uncomfortable, isn't it? As the documentary progressed, Bagans found himself faced with a dilemma. The house was unsafe to film in, his crew was suffering, locals were terrified, and the priests warned him not to continue. Police also refused to step inside, and he was left with 2 choices: finish the documentary or leave the house alone. Naturally, he chose both. He completed the film, then made a decision that shocked even his own fans. The house is demolished. Bagans had the Ammons house completely demolished, knocked down, flattened, erased. He didn't attempt to renovate it, didn't try resell it, didn't want to list it on Airbnb under spacious, moody property with a strong personality. He destroyed it. In his words, the place shouldn't exist anymore. That's actually, and that shows you got money, doesn't it? You can just demolish a house. But I mean, he did morally the right thing there, which many people wouldn't have done. They would have just kept renting it out, letting people get harmed by this thing. But yeah, neighbours reportedly applauded him, and one said, good, that house wasn't right. Another said, I don't think anything living belonged in there. So Bagans didn't throw away the rubble. He kept it. He placed it in a storage facility and sealed it. There is something deeply unsettling about storing the remains of a demolished demon house, like it's a museum archive. In the documentary, Bagans claimed that the objects still carried a dark energy, and this may sound theatrical, but in demonology, the idea that a location's energy can cling to physical objects is recognised as a concept called residual attachment. And historians note that in medieval Europe, haunted structures often burned or buried to prevent contamination. In that sense, Bagans unintentionally followed centuries of cultural precedent. The demolition didn't dispel the neighbours' unease. Residents insisted the land felt wrong. A postal worker refused to walk near it, and one neighbour said they tore the house down, but the feeling stayed. Interestingly, after the demolition, several locals claimed to hear knocking or scratching from the empty lot at night, which, given the lack of walls, is deeply inconvenient for skeptics. And the demon house went on to become one of Bagans' most watched projects. I have not seen this, and I cannot believe I have not seen this. The moment I finish recording this, I am going to go and find it and watch it. And it's already nearly 9 p.m. So, probably not going to sleep. Anyway, this brought the Ammons case into the global spotlight and solidified its status as one of the most widely documented hauntings of the 21st century. But the film doesn't answer the biggest questions, which is why the house is truly demonic. Were the children mentally ill or influenced by suggestion? Did trauma play a role? Were environmental toxins involved? What caused the police interference? And why did so many unrelated professionals report paranormal experiences? These questions form the backbone of the next chapter, the deep dive, because a case this complex requires more than storytelling. It demands analysis. The Ammons case is bizarre enough to satisfy every horror fan alive, but it's also complicated enough to trouble every skeptic, psychologist and historian who's ever tried to make sense of it. And here's the inconvenient truth: no single explanation accounts for everything that happened, which is exactly why this case refuses to fade into obscurity. Let's break it down carefully, methodically, and without pretending the answers are simple. So there are skeptics who believe the entire story is an exaggeration and a misunderstanding or just hysteria, but the skeptics themselves disagree, which is always a promising start. So this theory suggests the family under financial stress and living in a deteriorating neighbourhood collectively convinced themselves, essentially, that something supernatural was happening. The problem with that is that mass hysteria does not make police cameras malfunction or social workers witness wall walking. It just doesn't happen. It also doesn't create medical staff fleeing from rooms, produce oily substances on concrete floors, or cause a documentary crew to physically become ill in that exact location. If hysteria can do all that, it deserves its own horror franchise, I think. Now, the religious suggestion theory, some argue that the family's strong Christian beliefs triggered misinterpretations of normal events, but this theory collapses when you remember that the family didn't report the first haunting, outsiders did. The children's behaviour worsened during a very specific context. Every doctor involved admitted confusion. The priest wasn't looking for demons, he was asked for help. Now, religious suggestion rarely convinces multiple unrelated government employees to rewrite their job descriptions. I don't think that happens. So then there's the fraud for profit theory. Another suggestion is that the family invented the story to sell rights, except they made no money from the initial reporting. They refused media interviews for months. They were embarrassed by the attention. That's a massive sign. And they moved away quietly. If that's not a family who doesn't want any of this, I don't know what is. People can try and say they wanted to make money, but what a load of bull. Clearly they did the opposite. Their actions did the opposite of that. Now we step into the tricky territory. What can be explained through psychology? Children under stress. Now, children in stressful environments can exhibit extreme behaviours, but they do not walk up walls, they do not speak in languages they don't know, they do not display sudden, disproportionate strength, and they do not simultaneously exhibit identical symptoms in multiple locations. Also notable, the children's behaviour improved dramatically when they were away from the house. Psychological distress doesn't vanish based on property boundaries. And then there's the sleep paralysis and the night terrors. So these could account for some of the nighttime experiences, like the whispering and the shadows and the breathing sensations, but does not account for the levitation, the wall walking, the medical reactions, and the growling, the physical injuries, the group experiences, and the continued effects on adults. At a certain point, the explanation becomes more far-fetched than the actual phenomenon. Now, some psychologists suggested dissociation, which is a trance-like episode triggered by trauma, but the psych evaluations noted the children were not exhibiting symptoms consistent with dissociation, nor did the episodes match known dissociative profiles. And then there's the environmental explanations. This is where the skeptics try their best to salvage the story from the supernatural. Like toxins and molds, could environmental hazards cause hallucinations? Now, possibly, but not for everything the family experienced. The black mold can cause headaches, anxiety, and confusion, but it cannot cause physical levitation, coordinated hallucinations, disembodied voices captured on radio equipment, shadows seen by multiple people, and violent physical behaviour beyond normal capacity, and equipment interference. If black mold could do all that, landlords everywhere would be performing exorcisms left, right, and centre. Also, carbon monoxide. Another popular theory is CO poisoning, which can cause hallucinations and cognitive effects, except the children were tested and results were normal, and the house detectors were functional. The carbon monoxide does not selectively affect children and spare adults. Also, carbon monoxide poisoning does kill. It doesn't just try to cultivate demonic kind of possessions. It will just kill you. Now, the demonology and historic parallels. If we examine the Ammons case through the theological lens, something eerie appears. It follows the classic stages of possession almost perfectly. So stage 1 is the infestation. Environmental disturbances, so that's the flies, the footsteps, the shadows, the footprints, the cold spots. This all matches exactly with documented cases from the 1600s onwards. Stage 2 is oppression, which is psychological and physical attacks, which is night terrors, growling, voices, manipulation, violence between siblings, and emotional instability. Stage 3 is oppression, where the entity focuses on specific individuals, such as the children, the mother, exacerbation of symptoms around spiritual triggers. And stage 4 is possession, which is loss of control, the levitating, the wall walking, voice changes, superhuman strength, aversion to sacred objects, and personality shifts. Now, the Ammons case wasn't just a haunting, it was a collision between religion, psychology, poverty, race, medical science, law enforcement, modern media, and ancient supernatural beliefs. It exposed the gaps between what institutions can explain and what they will admit and what families actually experience. The DCS couldn't explain it, the police couldn't explain it, and the doctors couldn't explain it, and the church's explanation was simple but terrifying. And in many ways, the Ammons case became a mirror. Everyone who looked at it saw their own worldview reflected back at them. Skeptics saw hysteria, the believers saw demons, doctors saw complexity, priests saw danger, police saw something they'd rather not discuss in the break room, and the documentary filmmakers saw a payday and a reason to demolish a house. So after all the analysis, all the theory and all the psychology and theology, what are we left with? A truth not easily categorised. Something happened in that house, something that multiple trained professionals could not explain, something that affected people physically, mentally and spiritually, and something that ended only when the house itself was destroyed, although apparently it didn't end. We are left with a haunting that refuses to sit comfortably in any box. It's not fully supernatural, not fully psychological, not fully environmental, not fully fraudulent, and not fully explainable. And that liminal space, that uneasy middle, is exactly why this case remains alive today. Which brings us to the final chapter. There are hauntings that fade when the last witnesses move away, stories that dissolve into the ether once the house is empty, the murmurs die down and the neighbourhood moves on. And the Ammons case is not one of those. It lingers, not because of the theatrics, though levitation and wall walking and uncooperative basements do tend to make an impression. It lingers because too many people had nothing to gain from reporting things they could not explain. We're not talking about a group of teenagers with a Ouija board and too much time on their hands. These were people whose careers were built on paperwork, procedure, like their reputation, and saying sentences like, there is no evidence to support that claim. And yet a DCS worker ran from the exam room, a nurse refused to return, a seasoned police sergeant admitted belief in supernatural after 40 years of service, a priest described manifestations identical to those documented for centuries, and a documentary crew suffered enough psychological symptoms to permanently alter their health. Everyone walked in skeptical and no one walked out the same. And even when the house was demolished, the grounds remained unsettling to locals. Some claim they still felt watched walking past the empty lot, which is impressive, really, considering there was nothing left to do the watching. Now, I think you could have agreed that this story and all of the facts in everything that I've just read you is so fascinating because we have all of these different factors that make up this incredible story that no one can just poo-poo away. Everyone has to have a take on it because you've got the voices of people who are well respected within society, and then you've got all of the events that happen and that the family are saying, and then from the documentary of Zach Bagans, you've got everyone in that team backing up essentially what the kids have said about, like, that guy who stayed there seeing the man with no face. There's lots of credibility in the Ammons demon house. I'm going to go and watch the documentary now. That's what I'm going to do. I really hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I've loved speaking to you about this. It's a longer form content, which I know that I haven't really done before. I will start doing podcast, recording myself, sharing this information with you. I'm just waiting to get my camera, and then I will try and do a couple in January. It might be sort of more towards the end because I don't want to rush it. I want to try and set up a few things before I get it out. But however, I will be releasing a podcast every week and you will be getting more longer format from me. Longer form content, shall I say. I can't speak now because I've been speaking for an hour and a half. Anyway, you take care of yourself. If you really liked this podcast, can you do me a favour and give us a follow? You can comment on there and on here and have a chat with me. You can find me on Instagram at the Darkling Chronicles, on TikTok at the Darkling Chronicles. You can email me, thedarklingchronicles25@gmail.com, if you have a ghost story, some kind of horrendous night terror or something like that. I love reading all of your stories. You can join my TDC gang, which is on Patreon. I've only got one membership price. I think it's about £4 a month. I'm going to be releasing, especially when I do my video podcast, it a week early before anyone else gets the video and before they go live on Spotify, YouTube and Apple. I am actually giving a bit more time and dedication to this page because I absolutely love it. And I just think, do you know what? Why not? Why not just talk to you guys more? I love it. We chat all the time on TikTok and stuff like that. So let's do this. If you do go to my Instagram, it's a work in progress. I've got so many videos that I need to upload to there, but it wasn't my platform of choice at first. So it's not got as much on it. TikTok is where I primarily am. Anyway, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is there for you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.